The night Cecily Doran saved a little boy's life, she didn't think she was doing anything brave. She was just doing her job. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the boy's father was watching from across the room, and that his name was the kind of name people said in whispers, if they said it at all. Before we get into what happened next, if you're new here, welcome to Sadie's Romance Library. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because this story, it does not go where you think it's going. It was a Tuesday in November, which meant the Lakeshore Grill was half empty, and the heating was fighting a losing battle against the wind off Lake Ontario. Cecily Doran had been on shift since 4 in the afternoon. It was now coming up on 9, and her feet were reminding her of every single hour. She was 22 years old, just finished her first aid recertification the previous weekend, which she'd paid for herself, $38 she didn't really have, and she was working doubles at the Grill 3 nights a week to cover the gap between her college loans and what her part-time daycare job actually paid. She wasn't complaining. That's important to understand about Cecily. She was not the kind of person who complained. She had a practical face, not plain, not striking, just the kind of face that made people feel immediately that she was paying attention to them. Brown eyes. Hair she kept back in a knot at the base of her neck because the owner, Mr. Paletti, had a thing about presentation. A small scar on her left chin from a bicycle accident when she was 9. She never thought about it. She'd stopped noticing it years ago. That Tuesday, the dining room had maybe 12 tables occupied, a couple celebrating something, anniversary maybe, or engagement, in the far corner. A group of 4 guys in contractor jackets taking up the big round table near the window. A woman eating alone with a book propped against the bread basket, which Cecily privately admired. And at table 6, the corner booth near the emergency exit, which was not a coincidence as she'd understand later, a man she had never seen before. He was sitting alone, or that was the impression he gave. He had a glass of still water in front of him, untouched, and he was looking at nothing in particular, in the way that very controlled people sometimes look at nothing, not zoning out, not distracted, just choosing not to engage with anything in the room while still being entirely aware of all of it. He wore a dark jacket, no tie, no rings. He'd ordered nothing when Cecily stopped by the table, just the water, and said in a voice that was quiet in a way that required you to pay attention, "Give me a few minutes." She gave him his few minutes. He was maybe 40, maybe a few years younger, maybe a few older. His face didn't give it away easily. Dark hair, a little long. A jaw that looked like it had made a decision years ago and stuck to it. He wasn't handsome in the easy way, the way the guys in the contractor jackets were handsome, loud and confident and taking up space. He was handsome in the way that felt like information. Like there was something about him you'd want to understand, if you were the kind of person who asked questions. Cecily wasn't particularly the kind of person who asked questions about customers. She brought them their food and checked in at the right intervals and let them have their meal in peace. That was the job, and she was good at it. She was carrying a tray of water refills to the anniversary couple when she heard the noise. It was small, as far as noises go, a scraping of chair legs, a gasp, short, sharp, from somewhere to her left, and then a thump, like something soft and significant hitting the floor. She turned before she fully understood what she was turning toward. The boy was on the ground near the hostess stand. He looked about 8 years old. He was wearing a navy coat with the collar done up, and he'd knocked over the little display of mints and matchbooks on his way down. His face was going the wrong color. Cecily set the tray down. She didn't put it down carefully. She just set it down and moved. Later, she'd try to explain to people that there wasn't really a decision involved. She heard that gasp, and she started moving, and there was nothing in between those two things. Her first aid instructor at the community center had said something like that. That training works because it fills the gap between stimulus and response so you don't have to think. She'd nodded along at the time. She understood it properly now. She hit her knees on the hardwood beside the boy. He was conscious, eyes open and terrified, which was good, and his hands were at his throat. Not grabbing, not clawing, just resting there, the way you put your hands on something when you don't know what else to do with them. "Hey," she kept her voice even. "Hey, look at me. Can you breathe at all? Even a little, He managed a small nod. Partial obstruction then. Not full. Okay, good, you're okay. And she meant it. The fact that he could nod, the fact that there was some air getting through, that was good news. What's your name? His lips moved. She leaned in. Bennett, she heard, barely. Bennett, good. Okay. Bennett, I'm going to help you sit forward a little bit. Just like that. She repositioned him, sitting slightly forward and to one side, and gave him 5 firm blows between the shoulder blades with the heel of her hand, the way she'd been taught, the way she'd practiced on the mannequin 3 days ago. On the 4th, something gave. Bennett Cahill coughed, a huge, full-body cough that racked through him like a system reboot, and then pulled in a breath so big that half the room heard it. And then he started to cry, which was honestly the best sound Cecily had heard in her recent memory, because kids who are crying are kids who can breathe. There you go, she said. There you go, you're okay. She kept her hand between his shoulder blades, not hitting anymore, just there, rubbing slowly back and forth the way her mother used to do when she was sick. You're all right, big breaths, easy. She was aware dimly that the room had gone completely silent. She was aware that the woman with the book had stood up and was clutching it to her chest. She was aware that the 2 guys nearest the hostess stand had pushed back from their table. What she was not aware of, not until the moment was already over, not until Bennett Cahill was breathing steadily and she was sitting back on her heels and thinking about whether she needed to call 911 as a precaution, was the man who had crossed the room in the time it took her to deliver 4 back blows and was now crouching on the other side of the boy. He had not made a sound getting there. He was just present, suddenly and absolutely present in the way that certain people are when they stop choosing to be invisible. His face, that decided face, was not cold anymore. It wasn't warm, exactly. It was something more specific than warm. It was concentrated. All of it, every bit of his considerable attention, focused on the boy the way a lighthouse focuses light, pointed, deliberate, and not something you'd want to stand directly in front of without preparation. Bennett. His voice was low. 1 word. That was all. The boy looked up, and through his tears his face reorganized itself into something like relief. Dad, he said. The man, the father, put one hand on the side of the boy's face. The gesture was so careful, so precisely tender, that Cecily felt suddenly that she was watching something private. She glanced away. He should probably be checked out, she said, to the floor. I can call. I have someone. The voice was the same. Quiet, requiring attention. She looked up. He was looking at her now. Not the way the customers usually looked at her, through her mostly, or at her hands when she was setting down their plates. He was looking at her the way she'd looked at Bennett, taking in information. You, he said, knew what you were doing. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a compliment either. It was an observation. I did a course, she said. Because that was true, and Cecily Doran didn't embellish. Something moved through his expression, not a smile, but adjacent to one. He didn't say anything else. He helped Bennett to his feet, checked him over with the efficiency of someone who'd learned how to assess things quickly, and in another 2 minutes there were 2 men in dark coats who appeared from somewhere, and a black car materialized outside the front windows. And then they were gone, and Cecily went back to work. She cleared tables. She ran the card machine. She helped the busboy stack the chairs at 10:30 when they turned off the dining room lights. Poletti, who had watched the whole thing from behind the bar and had his hand on the phone the whole time but hadn't actually called anyone because Cecily had it handled, told her she was a good kid and comped her shift meal. She ate her pasta standing up in the kitchen. Because the front of house was being mopped, she did not think about the man in the dark jacket, or she tried not to. She wasn't entirely successful. If you're thinking you know where this is going, that he walked back in the next morning with flowers and a thank you card, you don't know this story yet. Because that's not how men like Declan Cahill operate. Declan Cahill did not send flowers. What Declan Cahill did, and this is a matter of record, in the sense that multiple people observed it and later described it in tones of quiet bewilderment, was nothing. For 11 days. He came back on the 12th day, not at a special time, not to a closed restaurant, just walked in at 7:20 on a Wednesday, sat down at table 6 again, and waited. Cecily was working. Of course she was working. She was almost always working. She came around the corner from the service hallway with a notepad and saw him and stopped for exactly 1 second, which was all she allowed herself, and then walked over. "Water again?" she asked. "Coffee," he said. "Please." So that was different, at least. She brought the coffee. He ordered the lamb shank, which she hadn't expected. She'd pictured him as a steak person. She mentioned this to Kezia, the other server working that night, in the brief overlap between their tables, and Kezia looked at her with an expression that suggested Cecily was missing something obvious. Which she was. She just didn't know it yet. He ate alone. She checked in at the right intervals. He didn't make it strange. He wasn't staring at her, wasn't trying to create moments. He just ate his dinner and drank his coffee, and when she came with the bill, he'd already put a card on the table. On the receipt, he wrote a number, not a message, not his name, just a number, in handwriting that was precise without being elegant, the handwriting of someone who had learned very deliberately to be legible. Cecily looked at it for a long time in the service station. Then she put the receipt in her apron pocket. Kezia, who had materialized beside her in the way that Kezia often materialized, said, "Do you know who that is?" "A customer," Cecily said. "Cecily, what?" Kezia looked at her. "That's Declan Cahill." The name meant nothing to Cecily, which is relevant, because in certain circles, in the circles that mattered in this city, in the circles that overlapped with city contracts and waterfront development and the kind of businesses that didn't have signs out front, the name Declan Cahill meant something specific. It meant, don't. Don't push. Don't ask. Don't be on the wrong side of something he cares about. He cared about his city. He cared about loyalty. He cared about his son, evidently, with a precision that Cecily had witnessed from approximately 18 inches away. She didn't know any of that yet. She knew his name now. She filed it. She texted the number 3 days later, at 11 at night, because she'd been thinking about it on and off, and had finally decided that the worst outcome was that it went nowhere, and she'd lived through worse than that. She wrote, "This is the server from the Lake Shore Grill. I wanted to make sure Bennett was okay." The reply came in 4 minutes, which told her something about how he related to his phone. "He's fine. He's been eating very slowly since then, and pretending it's not because of what happened." She laughed. She was surprised by it, the fact that it was funny, the fact that he'd said something funny, the fact that she was sitting in her apartment at 11 at night, laughing at her phone. "That's probably smart," she wrote back. "He wanted me to thank you. He can thank me himself, if he ever comes back in." A pause, longer than 4 minutes this time, and then, "We might arrange that." Here's where it would be easy to skip ahead. To summarize, to say they started talking, they started meeting, things progressed. But that would miss the part that mattered, which is the part where Cecily found out who Declan Cahill actually was. She didn't find out from him. She found out from a coworker's boyfriend, who worked in commercial real estate, and turned a very specific shade of careful when she mentioned the name. She found out from a Google search at 1 in the morning that turned up news articles. Not about anything criminal. Because there was never anything criminal. Declan Cahill was not careless, but about construction bids and rezoning applications and a labor dispute in 2019 that had resolved very suddenly in a way that no one publicly explained. She found out from the way Kezia had looked at her that Wednesday night. She put it together. She thought about it for 2 days. She was, by nature, a practical person. She made a list, not literally. She wasn't quite that type, but the kind of mental list you make when you're trying to be honest with yourself about something. What she knew, what she didn't know, what she was afraid of, what she wasn't. She wasn't afraid of the name. She'd grown up in a family where there wasn't much room to be afraid of abstract things. Her mother had worked 2 jobs after her father left, and Cecily had learned early that fear was only useful when it was actionable. A name that people said quietly in offices wasn't actionable. It was just information. What she had more trouble with was the way she felt when his number was in her phone, which was something like careful and something like attentive, and something underneath both of those that she didn't have a word for yet. She texted him on a Thursday. "I looked you up." The reply came in 2 minutes. "And I'm still texting you. I know. I noticed. Then, does it change things?" She thought about that. She thought about the way he'd crossed that room, the single word he'd said to his son, the handwriting on the receipt that was precise without being elegant. "I don't know yet," she wrote. "I think I'd have to know more. Then ask me things." So she asked him things, not in a flirtatious way. Cecily didn't do coy. It wasn't in her skill set, and she didn't regret that. She asked him the things she actually wanted to know. Whether Bennett's mother was in the picture, what Bennett wanted to be when he grew up, whether Declan had people he was close to, or whether the kind of life he lived made that hard. He answered. Not all of it, not all at once, and she understood that there were edges where answers stopped and she shouldn't push. But he answered more than she expected. He asked her things back. He asked about the daycare, which surprised her. She'd mentioned it once, in passing, and then asked follow-up questions that meant he'd actually listened the first time. He was, she found, someone who listened. Genuinely. The kind of listening that feels like something, that has weight. She met him for coffee, not a date. She hadn't decided yet whether this was going to be a date, and she was honest about that, and he accepted the honesty without flinching. Just coffee, at a place on King Street that was quietly good without being the kind of place people took pictures. He was on time. He was wearing the same dark jacket, or one very similar. He stood up when she came in, which was old-fashioned enough that she noticed it. Bennett was not there for this one. Bennett was, apparently, at hockey. He played defense. "Does he know?" she asked when they were settled. "That you're—" She paused, not sure what word to use. "He knows I'm having coffee with the woman who helped him," Declan said. "He told me to wear something that doesn't look like I'm going to a funeral." Cecily looked at the jacket. He has a point. That was when he smiled. Not the adjacent to a smile that she'd seen in the restaurant. An actual smile that came and went quickly, like a door opening and closing. But she caught it. She thought, oh, that's going to be a problem. Not a problem she wasn't going to walk into anyway, but still. Now, we need to talk about Garrison Price, because that name matters to this story in a specific way. And if you think this is just a love story, if you think it's just about a waitress and a man with a complicated name and his son who ate too fast, then Garrison Price is the part where you understand what this story is really about. Garrison Price was 44 years old. He managed mid-market investments out of an office on Bay Street with a view of the lake that he paid for with other people's money in ways that were, technically, legal. He wore suits that were expensive in a way he wanted you to notice. He had been, until about 14 months prior, Cecily's mother's financial advisor. 14 months prior was when Cecily's mother, Noreen Doran, had trusted Garrison Price with the $63,000 she'd saved over 28 years of working, and Garrison Price had moved that money somewhere it was never recovered from. Cecily knew this. She'd known for over a year. She'd helped her mother file a complaint with the regulatory body, a process that had produced, in response, a great deal of official paper and approximately no results. She'd spoken to a lawyer who explained, apologetically, that the particular structure of what Price had done made civil action likely to cost more than they'd recover. She'd sat with her mother at the kitchen table in the house. Noreen had been in for 26 years and done the math out loud, which was the hardest thing she'd done in recent memory, and then they'd done it again more quietly. $63,000 was, for Noreen Doran, the difference between staying in that house and not staying in that house. Cecily had not told Declan any of this. It wasn't that she was hiding it. It was that it was hers and her mother's, and she'd learned to be careful about what you give to people before you know what they'll do with it. She told him on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks after the coffee on King Street, on a walk along the waterfront that had started as something she needed and had turned into something else by the time they reached the harbor front. She told it plainly, the way she did things, no excess, no performance. This is what happened. This is where it stands. This is what I can and can't do about it. Declan walked beside her and listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The lake was choppy that day, gray and serious, the way it gets in January. A flock of gulls argued over something near the water's edge. "Price," he said. "Yeah, Bay Street, yeah." Another pause. "How long ago did you file the complaint?" 14 months. He nodded once, slowly, and then he said, "Cecily." She looked at him, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond. She nodded. I know people, he said. Who know people? That's not a metaphor and I think you understand it isn't. There are things I can do, things that would happen without your involvement, without your mother's involvement, that would put significant pressure on Garrison Price in ways that a regulatory body isn't going to. He stopped. Let that land. What I am not going to do, he said, is do any of them without telling you first, because you and your mother are the ones who get to decide what happens here, not me. Cecily looked at the lake. A long moment. The gulls had moved further down. What kind of pressure, she said. Not a question, exactly. Just the next sentence. The kind that makes a person decide to resolve things quietly. That's not the same as justice. No, he agreed. It's not. And is the quiet resolution the kind she actually gets the money back? Something in his expression said yes before he said it. She was quiet for a long time after that. A boat went by, a small one, cutting through the chop with some effort. She watched it until it passed the breakwater. I'm not going to say yes tonight, she said finally. I need to think about it. And I need to ask my mother. That's the right answer. She turned to look at him. He was watching the water. You're not, she started. I'm not anything, he said. I'm standing here. Take the time you need. Which was, she would think later, the exact right thing to say. And the fact that he knew it was the exact right thing to say. That was information too. She asked her mother. Or rather, she came home and sat at the kitchen table, and Noreen made tea, and they talked for 2 hours about things that weren't Garrison Price before Cecily said what she'd actually come to say. Noreen Doran was 58, and she had the specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from having too much taken. She'd been carrying it quietly for over a year. Cecily watched her carry it and hated it, and had run out of legal options. When she told her mother about Declan, not all of it, but enough, Noreen was quiet for a while. Then she said, "And you trust him?" Cecily thought about that, about the receipt with the number, about the listening, about the Sunday by the lake. I think, she said, I trust what I've seen him be. Noreen turned her mug around in her hands. Once, twice. That man stole from me, she said. Not angry, just clear. He smiled at me across a desk and he took 28 years of my savings, and he is out there right now getting on with his life. Cecily didn't say anything. This wasn't the part where you said anything. I don't want him in prison necessarily, Noreen said, and then, more quietly, I want my money back. I want to stay in my house. Cecily called Declan the next morning. What happened after that? The specific mechanics of what Garrison Price experienced in the weeks that followed is not something Cecily asked about in detail. She understood, in the abstract, that certain things moved, that certain people with certain information appeared at the right moments in the right places. What she knew concretely was this. 43 days after her conversation with Declan on the waterfront, Noreen Doran's phone rang. It was a lawyer she'd never heard of, representing a client she'd never heard of, with an offer to settle all outstanding disputes with full repayment plus administrative costs. Noreen called Cecily immediately after. Cecily was at work, mid-shift, and she took the call in the back stairwell between the service kitchen and the loading dock. Her mother's voice on the phone was something she hadn't heard in over a year. Clear, like something had been lifted. Cecily, she said, it's the full amount. Cecily sat down on the stairs. She didn't mean to. Her knees just made the decision. Okay, she said. And then, she was crying in the back stairwell of the Lakeshore Grill, quietly, the way she cried, which was not loudly and not for very long, but very completely. She texted Declan. Just 2 words, she called. His reply came in under a minute. Good. And then, how are you? She looked at that question for a moment. How are you? Such a simple question. The kind people ask without thinking about it. He was thinking about it. I'm in a stairwell crying, she wrote. So pretty good, all things considered. A pause. Then, do you want company? She almost said no. She had the no already formed. And then she thought about the lake and the door opening and closing and a boy named Bennett who'd been eating slowly for 11 days. I'm at work until 10, she wrote. I know where to find you. He was there at 10. Not inside. He'd learned by then that she didn't like the idea of people watching her work. He was outside, leaning against a car she recognized now, collar of his jacket up against the January cold. She came out and he was just there, the way he'd been just there when she needed him to be, and she stopped on the step and looked at him and said, "You know this is complicated." "I know," he said. "I don't know all of what you do." "No," he agreed, "and I'm not sure I should know all of it." "That's probably right." She came down the last step. They were the same height like this, approximately, with her on the sidewalk and him not. The cold was serious. A streetcar went by on the next block, throwing orange light. "I'm going to need you to be honest with me," she said, "about the things I need to know. Even when it's complicated, yes. And I need—" She stopped. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "I need you to know that I'm not someone who can be managed," she said. "I know that might be what you're used to. I need you to know I'm not that." Something happened in his expression that she couldn't fully name. It wasn't the smile. It was something older and quieter than the smile. "Cecily," he said, "the night I met you, you were on your knees on a restaurant floor keeping my kid alive, and the first thing you said to me was that you'd done a course, a beat. I have not once thought that you were someone who could be managed." She looked at him for a long moment. The streetcar sounds faded. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay." She put her hands in her pockets. "It's cold. Are you going to stand there or are we going somewhere?" And just like that, the night stopped being about Garrison Press, about back stairwells and phone calls, about all the things that had led to this moment. It became about two people standing on a January sidewalk in Toronto, deciding, mutually and without drama, to go somewhere. Bennett, for the record, did come back to the Lakeshore Grill. He sat at table 6 with his father, 4 months after the night he'd knocked over the mint display, and he ordered the chicken fingers because he was 8, and that was the correct call. He ate them methodically, one at a time, still a little cautious, but without the fear that had been in his eyes that first night. Cecily brought them over herself. She set the plate in front of him, and he looked up at her with his father's eyes. That same quality of attention, inherited or learned, she couldn't tell, and said, "Thank you for saving my life." She'd been prepared for something like this, and still wasn't quite prepared for it. "You did most of the work," she said. "You stayed calm." He considered this. "Dad says staying calm is the most important thing. Your dad's right about that one." Bennett looked at his father, then back at her. He was weighing something. "Are you going to be around?" he asked. Declan, across the table, looked at her too. Not the lighthouse look, the door-opening look. Cecily pulled out her notepad, the one she always had in her apron pocket, and set it on the table in front of Bennett. "I'm here Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights," she said, "and other times, probably." She paused. "If that works." Bennett picked up the notepad, looked, set it back down, picked up a chicken finger. "Okay," he said, "and that, if you're looking for the moment this story ended and something else began, was probably it. Before you go, if this story hit you the way I hope it did, please leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And drop a comment. Do you think Cecily made the right call trusting Declan? Or would you have walked away? I want to know what you think. Subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library if you're new here, and I'll see you in the next one.